Thank you, Comrade Kashifa. The South Africans call each other comrades. I like that. Not everyone is called comrade. If we are in trenches with each other, that's kind of an honor to be called a comrade by you. Thank you. It's very elementary, very preliminary. It's just really a way of starting to think about it. And by care and the notion of radical care, really I'm trying to tie it with social reproduction. And that is kind of a difficult terminology, so instead of saying social reproduction, I'm using care work in the conversation. So, but maybe not in the sense that, for example, Manisha, you were using as care workers, in more general. So main message that I want to get across is in order to construct a humane urbanism, we need a completely different kind of understanding and practice of care. What I call, there's a collective of radical feminists in Germany also who have a radical collective care, radical care collective is there. So what do I mean by that? I want to get this message through. Why, in order to have a humane urbanism as an opposition to what we have today, which is really a bully urbanism, the one who has more power and more money just bullies the other ones out of the block and out of their livelihood, globally and locally. What is at the center of that is a new way of thinking about care, and I call it radical care. And I hope I can, this was supposed to unfold 1, 2, 3, but I'm not good with PowerPoint, so don't look at 2 and 3. Okay. So care work is central to project of urbanism, and we have known it even in the colonial era. Our own Thierry Barnes have written about how women worked hard to make the cities, when cities were the bastions for the mine workers, and how women who moved from the margins of city made the colonial era. I don't want to take long here. So neoliberal era, we know when the state withdrew from provision of services, from providing water, sanitation, or municipal garbage collection, all of that withdrawal of the state, who replaced it? It was the work of women that was basically added to their daily work to carry water, to do all of these other works that previously we would have thought municipal government would do it. Transnational era again, how when capital is needing to make more money, where is it transferring its cost? The cost of social reproduction is carried by families of workers across the world. So what we need to understand in all these different eras and how social reproduction and care work, which at the center of it are women, have been central to the project of urbanization. So that's one, in all these different eras we see how that has been very important in urbanization, urban development project and urbanism. But secondly, how it has always been systematically made invisible, right? So this making invisible is different, it has different means. For example, for the municipal work, it is by justifying it as municipal housekeeping. It's the gender role of women that they want to care not only for their house, but also go out and sweep their neighborhoods when the municipal services are not sent out to their neighborhoods. It's their responsibility as good mothers to take care of their neighborhood, to take care of their municipal work. So in that sense, how the work of care or social reproduction is contributing to urban development is being made invisible. There's an author, Humane, she writes about carescapes in Hong Kong and how these luxury units are called self-care precisely because the people who come into these luxury units and clean and cook and fold and wash and do all of that will never get any eye contact with the people who live in those luxuries. And that is actually the advantage of these luxury units, that they don't get the discomfort of seeing who did all the work. So the value of this real estate property is precisely because it has been able to make the care work invisible. In my own work in Global Heartland, we saw that the racism, the nativism that is on the rise now is precisely because there is care, the free care work that all the families around the world are investing in the urban development and revitalization and growth and livelihood and prosperity of Beerstein is made invisible by actually not only temporarily manipulating the time that we saw in Hong Kong example, but actually outsourcing it, shipping out to the other side of the world to be performed by families of the meatpacking workers in their home communities, so that the Beerstown residents of the Rust Belt don't see who is actually investing free work in the development of their towns. So these are the ways in which the social reproduction work, the care work, is made invisible. But at the same time, it is core to ability of the cities to be doing what they do, which is growing, urbanism project. Am I going too fast?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, did we get the first 2 points that care work, social reproduction work, and with women at the center of it is crucial to the project of urbanization and urban development, and secondly, it is made systematically invisible, and that making invisible is very important to this project. So these were the 2 points I brushed through. So the third point I want to get across is this making the care work invisible has been crucial to allowing the toxic brew of capitalism, racism, and sexism. How, and I think I implied by talking about how the nativist narratives in white Midwest Beerstown that I wrote about, that meatpacking town, they think they are taking our jobs and we are the ones developing communities in Mexico or in Togo because we are providing jobs and they are just taking our resources. But they don't see how families are investing in their development, and it allows them, it justifies for them to be very righteous about, you know, with this discourse of nativist, right, the racism that comes out of it. So again, there I want to show making the social reproduction work invisible has allowed the rise of this toxic discourse of nativism and white supremacy together with sexism, right? Okay, now, my proposition is then that we need to do two things if we want to undo this inhumane urbanism. If we want to make the first steps towards something that we could call humane urbanism, right, we need to do two things. Locally, globally, through our scholarship, through how we research, investigate, activism, organizing, in any way we can, we have to make the care work visible. Where segregation is another way in which you could make invisibility. We don't see who is doing their work, the service work that is happening in our cities. So in whatever we do, one agenda should be that making the care work, the social reproduction work visible. But the second point, which I will spend the rest of my 5 minutes, is rethinking the notion of care. And it's very elementary, you know, I'm not far in it. So it was interesting that Prexy mentioned Audre Lorde as somebody that the new generation wouldn't know or refer to. So I have been influenced in thinking through what is this notion of care that is different. If the notion of care that I would say that the way it has been so far has been used as an alibi for super exploitation, and you know. So if we want a different idea, different thinking, different function of care work that we call it radical care, I have been influenced, or it has helped me to think through it, two concepts. One is by Audre Lorde's writing on eroticism and erotic society, and the other one by feminist anthropologist Miriam Ticktin, humanitarian care and emotional governance. So the first one, really what I get from Lorde's erotic society and eroticism. She talks about erotic as deep sharing, right, as deep feeling, and a sense of, and as an opposition to pornography. Pornography is precisely that way of not repression of feeling, right, and not having basically, repression of feeling. So in talking about erotic society, We are talking about societies that allows that kind of deep sharing and deep feeling, which is opposite of pornographic society. When I read Miriam, if we think about what Miriam Ticktin critiques as humanitarian care, we precisely see that kind of pornographic care. She doesn't call it pornographic governance, she calls it emotional governance. But what are the principles of humanitarian care? I see humanitarian care as opposition to, or humanitarian urbanism as opposition to humane urbanism. Humanitarian care is precisely the discourse that we have around us with all the refugee and all the crisis that is around us. It's driven by, it's temporal. It's moment of crisis, it comes and then disappears, right? We had a lot to say about when they were executing the prisoners, what kind of drugs they were using on them for execution. Was it humane that they were using this kind of pharmaceutical injection or not? But it's at that moment that our humanity arises. Or when the bodies of the children are washed ashore, in that moment of crisis, or refugee boats that get sunk, we think of humanity, right? But it is not a long-lasting. It is appears in the moment of crisis and disappears. Its affective frame is different in the sense that it doesn't go above the individual. It always becomes compassion that is limited to individuals, as opposed to addressing historical, structural problems, right? So these are kind of, if we want to think about radical care would have these elements that in critique of humanitarian care we notice. Humanitarian care also believes and seeks for the impossibility of purity, to find somebody who is absolutely innocent, right? So if you want to grant refugee status, you have to prove that it was not your desire that brought you to this country. You were absolutely innocent. You had no desire in that. It was something above that. Okay, so let me just, without taking any more, go over what I would say would be the main elements of radical care. I want to also thank David and Efad, because they were in my graduate seminar when we did these readings and the discussions and all of that, so that was, they are familiar with the discussions, of course. Radical care is in its practice and form of action, as well as in its scholarship and projects of investigation, making care work visible. Radical care is historical in the sense that it concerns structures, but also includes and moves beyond individuals. Radical care does not have a hierarchy of humanity, which humanitarian care creates these hierarchies of humanity based on where you are in the degree of your innocence, right? So it ties it to national sovereignty, to national, but the radical care would be beyond that, beyond the deserving people or victims only could qualify for that, for our care. Radical care is erotic, empowering, and deep sharing, as opposed to pornographic. Emotional governance through individualized compassion, and its affective frame is interscalar. It moves across the structures and individuals, local and global. And lastly, what I mentioned, it is not temporal and emergency driven, but it's there. So if we thought about, I actually am not sure this is about that. So if we thought about these elements, that is perhaps how we could think in a different way about care work and about social reproduction, and about how we could avoid that situation where the care and humanitarian care, as well as social, they are used as a way of justifying super exploitation, and also nativist racism and sexism. All of that often is using the discourse, of course, and the practice of discourse. So maybe we should emphasize on a different kind of care that we can call it radical care. And I stop here because I want. Yeah.